You are listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place. Hello and welcome to another fine episode of Arcane Carolinas. I'm your co-host, Charlie Mushaw, and we were definitely not just creating on accident what is probably going to be the stinger at the end of this episode.
It definitely is. I am your other co-host, award-winning novelist Michael G. Williams, and today we're going to talk about a story that I don't even remember where this came from. Did somebody suggest this to us or what?
Yep. This was a suggestion. I want to say from Facebook. I could be wrong about that. If you are the person that suggested it and it was not from Facebook, I apologize. But it got added to the list some time ago as a suggestion, and here we are.
So the topic for today is the Bingham Light.
Singular.
Yes. It is not the Bingham Lights. It's not like the Brown Mountain Lights. It is just the Bingham Light.
Okay. And just to be clear, the reason I ask is because I put it in wrong then on the big episode list of ideas because I put it in plural. That's why I was like, well, I'm already learning things.
Bingham is Bingham, FYI, for people who might go Googling this while they're listening. So this story comes to us from Dillon County, South Carolina. I'm going to talk very briefly about Dillon County. It was established in 1910. It's named for James W. Dillon, an Irish immigrant who worked to promote economic modernization in the area. And specifically, he did a lot of work to bring railroads so that that area could be connected to the larger transportation networks.
Okay.
As of 2010, Dillon County had about 400 square miles and about 32,000 residents. So it is very rural. Like the mean population density in the county is just shy of 80 people per square mile, which is pretty sparse to begin with. But mostly those people are concentrated in a handful of towns and communities. So it is like big stretches of unoccupied land.
Nice. I like that.
The towns and those other locales in Dillon County include the town of Dillon, which is the county seat.
Dillon.
The town of Latta, Latta.
Later.
And I don't know how they're pronounced.
I'm just saying them wrong on purpose. just to aggravate some very specific people.
I love it. And the once upon a time census designated place, it is no longer even designated as a place in the census of Bingham, where our story takes place, as well as some other towns and some other designated places. I'm going to skip them. But before we get into this story, I do want to mention one local business because Dillon County is home to the census designated place of Hamer, South Carolina, which is perhaps best known as the home of South of the Border.
Ha! Look at that.
Yeah. I'm not going to dive into South of the Border here because that deserves to be its own content.
Well, we already talked about it.
Yeah, we already have talked about it. I don't want to like try to retread that ground and et cetera. But suffice to say, I'd like to again give a shout out to Richard Church, that friend and listener who has sent us photos of locations, and he was generous enough to send us some fun things from South of the Border and from Bladenboro, which is not too far away, a couple of months ago. So thank you again. Today's legend, like I said, is from the community of Bingham, which is just west and a little north of the town of Latta. And I've seen it described as Latta, formerly known as Bingham, but they are distinct places. And like once upon a time, Bingham had its own post office. It had its own ticket office for the train service. It didn't have a big depot, but it had a stop for people to board or depart the train because there was a famous resort nearby.
Can I make a prediction that may or may not be accurate?
Yes.
Knowing nothing about this story, sounds like a mill town that ceased to be after the business left.
Well, I think actually it was more like an agricultural town.
Okay.
And there was this hot springs resort or something like that nearby that's apparently now abandoned, and there are people who go and explore those ruins, and that was like the main economic focus of the town.
Gotcha. Interestingly, if you go on Old Greensboro Road west out of Chapel Hill, about 45 minutes to an hour, there's a little town that was exactly that. It changes from Old Greensboro Road to something else once you get out there, if you don't turn to go towards Greensboro. But if you keep going, the platform is still there where the train would pull up and all the farmers would bring their stuff. And there's a tiny main street. The town hall is still there. The sheriff's office is there. There's a food carry out, and then a couple empty and abandoned buildings. So yeah, I can visualize this perfectly, knowing exactly the type of town that you're describing.
Yeah. These days, Bingham is it's a rural area. It's a very small community. It's basically a handful of churches and private homes, a lot of agriculture, and what looks from above, if you look at it on Google Maps, to be like reforested farmland, because the trees grow in perfectly straight rows.
Yeah, it's really freaky when you're like hiking in a place when that happens. There's a section of the Mountains of the Sea Trail that runs along the Eno that there's this eerie portion, if you're on there, where all of a sudden you just realize that all the trees are in sync. It's like all very natural until you get into this one section. And if the sun hits through them right, you're like, I'm in a 32-bit era video game where all the trees are perfectly aligned. This is strange.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm going to guess that this might be one of those areas that the Department of the Interior reforested during the Great Depression, but I don't know. You know, that's a hunch. So briefly, let's also talk about the Native American peoples of Dillon County. What is today called Dillon County was once the territory of the Cheraw Indians and the PD tribe. The Cheraw were a Siouan people who made their homes in towns along the banks of the PD River. Very little is known about the Cheraw, and we've actually discussed them in more than one episode in the past. But to refresh your memory, the Cherokee called them the Yanisuwali, and the Catawba called them the Sarah, which meant place of tall weeds. And that name Cheraw is derived from that Catawban name for them. And we use that today partly because the name that the Cheraw used for themselves is totally lost to us. The Cheraw were very private people. And so like they tended to populate areas that were much more withdrawn from other tribes that had a lot less interaction with them. They are one of the groups that when the conquistadors came through in 1540 in Western North Carolina, they encountered the Cheraw when they also encountered the Mississippians who had built the town of Jawara near Hickory.
Yeah, I remember them because of the tall grasses.
Yes. So the Cheraw numbered approximately 1,200 in the year 1600, but we're down to 50 by the middle of the 1700s. And their last mention as an independent people is in 1768.
50 people is a social club.
Yeah, 50 people is not very many people. After that, those who remained either joined the Catawba or they moved northeast into North Carolina and were part of the peoples who helped make up the Lumbee tribe. The pre-colonial PD were notable for building burial mounds along the PD River, which flows just a few miles from the location of this story. And some of those mounds still exist and can be seen to this day. The PD were also a Siouan people and engaged in widespread trade. They had a very vast trade network on the PD River and on the rivers that fed into it, including moving large amounts of goods up and down the river. They were really accomplished agrarians. They grew large crops and traded them with other tribes and later with colonists in the region. And to some degree, they both have to be listed in part because the PD were bigger and in part because the Cheraw didn't start here, or if they did, they relocated to the highlands of Western North Carolina for a while and then moved back into the region in the early 18th century as a result of attacks on them by the Iroquoian Empire to the north. Again, I mention a lot of these things in part because I think we do a tremendous disservice to Native people's cultures and histories when we sort of go out of our way to reduce their relationships and their lifestyle to this sort of shallow, idyllic description. Or, for instance, when we call their towns villages, the Cheraw and the Cherokee and the Catawba and the PD, they all built towns with features like public plazas and town halls and infrastructure. And it's very important to me that we remember their rich and complicated history and the fact that they had complex politics and complex economies in place already when the first Europeans arrived. And there was this whole matrix of diplomacy and rivalry and cultural influence that got disrupted by that.
I mean, that's just people. I mean, I made the reference or the aside that, you know, you get down to around 50 people. It's more of a social club at that point, like, because there's not a lot of people left. You're still going to have conflicts in that small of a group, even.
Yeah.
I mean, think about whatever office you work in and the interpersonal relationships across the 12 people that you might work with regularly. You know what I mean? There's dynamics at play, no matter how big or small. Crap, there's family dynamics when you get So yes. Anyway, point being, yes, idyllic, you know, like, and this is how it was, and like the cartoon version.
Yeah.
Of describing the way a group of people live together with their neighbors is not doing anyone any favors.
Yeah. And the PD Indians, though, they still exist today. They're a recognized tribe. They have a tribal government. They provide education both to their own people and to those not of their tribe regarding their traditions, their culture. And they have as part of their big efforts is empowering the PD people who survive. So I think that's really good. I think that's really important to remember. Now, the legend of the Bingham Light, as commonly recounted. And I'm going to start this with a warning. And that is the phenomenon that I am about to describe happens on private property that is used for hunting
Oh, good.
It is
private game lands.
Yes. It is referred to in the area as the hunting club, but it is a set of pieces of private property owned by individuals who use that for hunting. It is trespassing to go there. The people with legitimate access to it go there to shoot stuff they see moving in the distance. So it is distinctly unsafe to go there in search of this phenomenon. The road to it is described as being left in disrepair or possibly purposely damaged in order to discourage people from going there. So please do not go to this place.
That's the most serious one you've ever given.
We've never done a story about a place where literally people go to shoot whatever's moving. I feel like this is not the fun place to take the kids to see a spooky light. Yeah. This is a fun thing to read about. Now that I've got that out of the way. In a remote rural area outside the small town of Latta, South Carolina, in the community of Bingham, this is the legend. A man walked along the railroad tracks late one night in the late 19th century. In some versions, his name is John Bingham. In some versions, his name is Bill Bingham. Either way, as Bingham walked the tracks, he was carrying with him a lantern. Mm-hmm. And again, in some versions, Bingham notices a problem with the tracks that might threaten the safety of a train that's about to come through. And he begins swinging his lantern to warn the train. And in some versions, Bingham's foot gets stuck in the tracks. And he sees the train approaching and begins to swing his lantern wildly to try to warn the train lest he be run over.
I think I see where this is headed.
You might. And in a third version, Bingham gets distracted or he gets tripped up because he's trying to hurry out of sight of the train because this is the place where he buries the bodies of his many victims.
Ooh, that's a good turn.
Isn't it?
That's the version we tell in October.
Right. I only saw that mentioned in a couple of places. I feel like that is very much embroidery, but it's worth mentioning because it gets brought up. In any case, no matter why he's on the tracks and what his condition is, when he's waving this lantern, the train hits him, kills him instantly, and shortly after that, his lantern begins to appear at the same spot where he died, moving back and forth along the train tracks. Mm-hmm. These days, the train tracks are long gone, as was the place where the train stopped to take on or let off passengers in that community. The railroad tracks are now a dirt road with no improvements whatsoever, and the place where the light appears is a cornfield. And if you do want to see this place, but safely, it's on Google Maps.
Or if you are a video gamer, as we know some of our listeners are, you can fly over it in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020.
That's true. I think, I don't know, it might be a lot easier to find that way. If you go look for it on online mapping software, you can find it. And if you do Google Maps Street View, you can quote unquote walk right past the place where you would see this. Because 15 years ago, a Google Street View car drove this unimproved dirt road and captured it.
Thank you, Google Street Car.
Yes. If you follow these complex directions that you can find online out to that cornfield at dusk or shortly after, and you walk that old railroad line that's now a dirt road to the spot where Bingham supposedly died, and you then call out, Bingham, show yourself. In the total darkness, with no streetlights, no houses, no buildings, nothing around you, then legend says Bingham's light will rise from the earth and begin to approach. And if you run, the light might even start to chase you. And if you cuss at it, it'll start changing colors because it makes him mad. And then if you're running and it's chasing you, then it'll give up after a short distance and return to the path that it usually treads along that dirt road where the tracks used to be.
This is a good one. I like this one.
Oh, I loved this story. I really love this story. And frankly, as far as the most commonly recounted version of the legend goes, that's that. Ta-da, that's all, folks. It's a lot like the Mako light. Supposedly the lantern of a deceased train engineer looking for the head he lost.
The Cattsburg ghost train light.
Yeah.
Which I went out there and did all that. Yeah, I like this a lot. I like this a lot because it has interactive elements. It's not just sometimes a light appears. The old, go drive these hills, and if you crest the seventh one at midnight, then the ghost car will chase you kind of thing. Except it's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. And distinctly unsafe.
Right.
I keep needing to say that. Yeah, I mentioned this in my notes to myself repeatedly. And it's a lot like a lot of other ghost light stories. Mm-hmm. But the Bingham light is unique also in any number of ways, not least of which is that it's experienced up close. It's a very personal phenomenon. Mm-hmm. People sometimes describe only seeing the light in the distance, but a lot of encounters that you can find claim that the light approached to within a few feet of them. And some even say that the light would blink out and reappear behind them as if being playful, or if maybe being angry, or maybe trying to herd them out of the place, or trying to scare them off. So with that little to go on, I said, well, is there anything to research here? I started looking for accounts of personal experiences of Bingham light first, since this was described, like I said, as kind of a more intimate phenomenon. Naturally, I first encountered people explaining that it is that good old standby swamp gas.
Yeah, right in the cornfield.
Right. And admittedly, there is a swamp like just the other side of the cornfield, but the field itself is not a swamp. It's near a swamp. And several of the reports and explanations I found went out of their way to draw a distinction between the swamp and the place where the light is seen, and to say people will tell you it's in the swamp, but it's not. Another popular mundane explanation is that the lights are reflected headlights because there's a state highway nearby, State Highway 34. I think this is, suffice to say, unlikely. Multiple accounts, including one from a journalist that I'll get to in a little bit, note that there is a gap in some trees at the end of the road, and that the land is so flat and the road is so straight that even though this is over a mile away from the curve in the road where this supposedly happens, you can see the lights of the cars out on the highway. And what is described is nothing like seeing headlights a mile away on a distant road. It is up close, personal, very different.
Changes colors.
A lot of people try to explain away the Brown Mountain lights by saying it's headlights and things like that. And you see that even with the Mako lights explanations. And I don't buy that as an explanation. I think headlights in the distance is about as tired as swamp gas.
Just laughing because I'm just remembering the Brown Mountain Lights episode where like the U.S. Geological Society was just like, yeah, it's not just headlights because, the road was washed out and they still showed up.
Yeah. So when I went looking for firsthand accounts, I found a few that I thought would be fun to share. In the early 2000s, a student at College of Charleston in South Carolina sent this is a partial report, to an electronic newsletter at the time of paranormal events that was called the Hawk Report. It goes like this. A group of my friends and myself went to a location outside Dillon, South Carolina, looking for Bingham's light. And it's important to note that he spells it as possessive. Like it's not just a light that's in the town of Bingham. It is that there is a person named Bingham who owns this light. So my friend from Florence had told me about this place. Supposedly an old railroad ran through this area. The story tells that Bingham was a railroad employee who was killed by a train. The light is Bingham trying to find his head. The spot has been visited by the television show Unsolved Mysteries. Now, I've watched a lot of Unsolved Mysteries and I've never seen it on there, so I'm going to go looking for that. At first, I was a skeptic to this place and story. I am currently attending the College of Charleston. A group of us have been talking about this light, quote, and decided to go. We went down an old logging road, which is part of a hunting club. There is a turnoff on the road which leads to the swamp. We had a group of about 14 with us. We walked down this turnoff road until it ended. We stood at the end of the road and stared into the woods. After about 15 minutes, we saw nothing.
Flashbacks to college right there.
Right.
This is all sounding incredibly relatable.
Half the group had to leave. There was 6 of us left in the swamp. We did not talk as much now. A couple of minutes after the other group left, we saw a light about 100 yards away. It started out small, about the size of a lighter. It proceeded to get bigger. It got to the size of a lantern. It then began rising above the ground. It rose about 20 to 30 feet in the air. It appeared to be moving towards us. The light then came back down slowly and went out. This was over a 5-minute period. We stood there hoping to get another look at the light. Several of us spotted it again. This time it was red. Again, it started out real small. It did not get as big as the white light. It moved side to side and still appeared to be moving closer. We watched this light for some time. It really freaked me out. I am looking forward to going again, which I think is a really fun little, simple explanation of what somebody saw.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, it's very typical of the other sightings you can find online. A bunch of details in common with other descriptions, like it doesn't appear for just anyone, and sometimes it takes its time, and it can change color, it can change size. Sometimes it moves side to side, and a lot of those descriptions it's described as moving like the swinging of a lantern being carried by someone.
Because I personally am feeling a very strong pull towards checking something like this out, we will reiterate, this is on private game land. Do not go.
Yes, please.
And that's not sarcastic. It's just like every time I'm about to say like, oh man, we should check this out, I'm like, nope.
Yeah, do not go to this place. And that's not a wink and a nudge. Please do not go get shot in these people's woods. Another pretty typical sighting that's undated, but it is from a very old website. It's hosted on tripod.com. So
nice.
Yeah.
Angel Fire.
It's still up, so there it is.
GeoCities.
None of the links on it work, but it's still up. Anyway, here's a description that somebody sent to that website of what happened when he and a dozen of his friends and relatives went looking for it. After going out to this location, there's like a lot of description of how to get there. It's very confusing. And then we all stood there and started screaming out his name. Bill Bingham, come out, Bingham.
Show yourself.
They kind of do just like go out in the woods and throw down the gauntlet. And they're like, come on, Ghost, let's fight.
I'm the ghost. I'm like, you didn't say the magic word.
After about 1 minute, we saw a faint glow in front of the way we were facing. It moved closer and closer towards us. Then it would vanish, then reappear again. If you cursed at it, it would change colors from white to red to green. So I come up with the idea of us walking towards it where it would appear. As 5 of us walked, we heard the others scream out, "It's behind you." I turned around and it was floating between our groups. Then it vanished, then reappeared in front of us. I mean, like face to face. I really enjoyed that. And he goes on, he describes another time that he went out there with some other people. And when it appeared, he, as he put it, got a bad vibe from it because he felt like it was mad at them. And so they all start running and they just take off running. This guy does not pretend bravado in his description. He's like, once we realized it was mad at us, we just wanted out of there. We just started running back up the road towards our cars. And he says, so we started running. We slipped and fell so many times. Every time I looked back, it was like 10 feet from us, still floating fast. It passed the crossroads and went about 100 yards from chasing us. It just vanished, then reappeared in front of us. It just sat there floating in one place. Then after a few seconds, it just vanished again. I've thought it over and over, trying to figure out if it was a prank or not. Me and a friend come back to the crossroads to check in the daylight hours. We scan the area for prints or cords or ropes, but none were found. There's no way a human can run through that mud we ran through without falling, and we never heard any sounds while it floated. What we saw there both times is what other people saw and told us. I thought that was a really fun detail. He's like, no, we slipped and slid a mile up the road.
Yeah.
And we can't find any evidence that the same thing happened to anybody else, and nobody can chase anybody on this road. So that was great. Also, earlier in that same account, the guy specifies that in the version of the story he heard, John, or in his case, Bill Bingham, was a black man. And that's a detail missing from other accounts, but it's important when you go looking for the real history behind stuff like that and you start looking at census records. So a final example is from Facebook, and it's a group called Palmetto State Paranormal. They posted about the Bingham Light, and then somebody wrote a really long comment, which I will take a little bit of, which was, so about the field, it is very large, but being as it is a cornfield, you have to make sure that the field is plowed, or else the corn will block any chance of seeing the light. If the field is plowed and you're lucky, you may get to see the light coming for you. Regarding the light itself, I know there are many variations of the backstory, but I don't care to get into that as I don't have any verifications for any of it. All I know is that the light is real. You call out to the light, and just depending on whatever it chooses to reveal itself, you will see it in the area, usually coming from way back in the distance near the tree line. The light isn't bright light or a glow. When I saw it, it was a very faint illumination. It isn't a steady glow. It shows itself in flashes and appears in random areas. Eventually, it comes closer to you and appears to chase you. It is so faint that you have to pay attention to where it turns up next, or it can be right up on you in no time. I thought that was a really fun, spooky little detail. A journalist in the area named Joshua Lloyd, he writes for South Carolina Now. He wrote an article about the Bingham Light in 2015. He also posted a video to YouTube of him and a friend going out to the location in question. He doesn't see the light himself, but I'll link to this video.
Did he ask right?
He might not have. You never know. And then one of the most interesting things I read about this comes from a book called Remembering Dillon County, South Carolina, published in 2008 by Arcadia Publishing and written by a different local journalist named Carly Wiggins. Carly Wiggins writes a column in the local newspaper, a long-running column exploring some of the more obscure history of Dillon County. In this book, he included a chapter titled In Search of the Bingham Light, because he had no interest in researching this until people heard he was writing a book about the history of Dillon County. And then they all started piling on him. You've got to write about the Bingham Light while you're doing this. He goes to great pains to reassure the reader that he is a skeptic. He talks about living in a house at one point that had strange knocks and moans and stuff like that all night. And he was like, but I didn't sit up worrying about it. And my son, who's an adult now, swears that house was haunted, but I think that's hogwash. And he is very dedicated to his side of the fence. He, in that book, said, the first article I wrote came out on a Thursday, and that Friday morning I received a call from a Mrs. Georgia McMillan. Mrs. McMillan said she lived on South Butler Road as a child and was then 57 years old at the time that he's writing this. She still lives in the Bingham area, and she still has vivid memories of the light. If you recall, I told you the Butler Road was the old railroad track that has been gone for a very long time. Mrs. McMillan said that she and her brothers and sisters had seen the light on Butler Road and not back up in the swamp as many have reported. She said that the light would light up the road at times and would come almost to Highway 34, but there is a small church located about maybe half a mile down the road called Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church, which started back in the late 1800s, from what I can gather. She stated that the light seemed not to be able to pass this church. She seemed to think the church might in some way have spiritual powers that held the light at bay. She added that the light would usually appear about 10 p.m. She also mentioned that at times they thought they would hear the roar of a train, but there was no train pass.
I like all that stuff.
And then he says, one of the most interesting stories about the light came from Suzanne Alford, who now lives in Latta and is 61 years of age. She said they moved to Bingham in 1966 from the same farm where I was born. Her mother was Ella Ferrier McCants, and who was born in 1900 and joined the Mount Olive Church in 1910. Suzanne said her mother told her that the story of the Bingham light came about from a man named Wylam Wynn, whose wife was named Ree. Neither Suzanne nor I am sure about the spelling of the names. This is a story that it was handed down from her mother.
These are good details, though.
Yeah. It seems that Mr. Wynn worked for the railroad, and when the train stopped for water very near where the light is most commonly seen, it was his job to pump water into the train engine. Well, the story goes that it was Mr. Wynn who lost his head. So I think it's important, again, to note this is private property. It is very engaging to read about. Please do not go there. In fact, the very first online description of this phenomenon that I found included a comments section, and the very first comment was from someone typing in all caps, "This is my property. Do not go on my property." So they mean it. But the guy who takes Wiggins there to see it is actually the person who, at the time that this was written, that this book was written, was leasing those hunting rights. So he was the person who had access to the land. He tells Bingham that the man was paid by the railroad to resupply water to the train, and that whenever it stopped in the community of Bingham, and in fact points out the place where the train would stop to let passengers on or off and to take on water. He shows him the place where the train used to stop to get water taken on and everything like that. And Garris, the guy who shows him this, also tells him that he doesn't believe the story, but this is a legend that is well known to locals and is not reliant on a personal experience or having been read online, things like that.
It's really cool. I like this one.
Yeah. So what's the real story behind all this? The very first verifiable thing about this story I found was something that nearly made me file it under definitely debunked. And it is it is a biological discovery made just a couple of years ago in South Carolina, but it turns out in a completely different part of the state. A unique breed of firefly called the Low Country Ghost.
Oh, that's cool.
This breed of firefly dimly glows instead of flashing, and when the males are competing for the attention of a female, they form a large cluster which glows brightly from their combined illumination, brightly enough to be seen in the distance.
Well, that rules.
Isn't that cool?
That is cool.
Yeah. So at first I was like, well, crud, science has taken a ghost from me. But in fact, science is not competing on this one.
No, and it's really cool.
Yeah, it's really, really neat. So armed with it, best a rough idea of the area involved and the possible names, I went digging first in newspaper reports. The libraries of the University of South Carolina maintain a free, publicly searchable database of historical newspapers from the state of South Carolina, including a bunch of African-American newspapers. It's a really, really cool resource, and I will link to it in the show notes. And it is well worth just browsing around in sometime if you're into that kind of thing. At any rate, I figured with the last name and train or locomotive, I could turn up a story if anybody died by train.
Yeah.
I found plenty of train wrecks and plenty of people whose deaths involved trains, but not a one of them happened in Bingham or Latta or Dillon County. So I got total bupkis on that one.
Okay.
Next, I went to my other old standby, the U.S. Census records. There, I found absolutely zero records of a Wiley Wynn or a Wylam Wynn or anything like that anywhere near this area, anywhere near this time. In either 1880 or 1900, nothing. It's interesting to note that the census records for the United States for the 1890 census were largely destroyed in a fire in 1921, and the remaining records can only be accessed from computers in the National Archives. Like they have publicly usable computers there to go search this, but they've never been put online. And much as I love DC, I was not going to make a trip for this one.
No. But
as soon as I started looking at 1880 for Binghams, I immediately found a John Bingham, aged 11, in the 1880 census, living in this place, and a William or Bill Bingham, his brother, aged 8. And then I took a look at 1900 to see if they were still alive. John Bingham is still there. William Bingham is not listed anywhere in the U.S. Census records at that time. And by 1900, John has had some kids. He's fathered some children, and he's named one of them after his brother, William.
Okay.
In the 1900 census, John Bingham, farm laborer, has a daughter named Willie. Maybe that's the origin of this story that gets handed down about this like Wiley Wynn or Wiley Wynn.
Maybe it's Willie. And she got married and changed her last name or something.
Yeah, maybe. So does John Bingham naming his daughter a feminine form of William indicate that his brother Bill is dead? Well, I can't find death records because death records were totally different at the time. And there just aren't death records for a lot of people in this era. But again, as we've discussed, and as I learned in the course of this regarding the 1890 census, records get lost and destroyed a lot more commonly than we think they did. And that kind of stuff just disappears out of the records. Another problem I had with this story initially was the idea that he would wave a lantern to try to stop the train, because trains constitute an enormous mass moving at speed.
They don't just stop.
Yeah, it can take a train a mile or more to stop from the moment that they start trying to. And that's why it's like so dangerous to go play on train tracks or walk on train tracks or sit on train tracks in traffic, which is like actually legitimately a huge problem in Durham, because like literally by the time the train sees you, it is way too late. Mm-hmm. So I kind of went into this story thinking it doesn't really make sense to think that somebody would wave a lantern and think that a train could stop, especially if they worked for a railroad.
A kid might, though.
A kid might. And that old railroad through Bingham is pretty much two straight lines with an elbow curve where the Bingham light appears. In either direction from that spot, the train would have been visible well over a mile away. And if I were stuck standing there with my shoe caught in the track and a lantern in my hand, I would absolutely have waved the hell out of a lantern in hopes that the conductor could see it and would stop in time. And if I died run over by a train only to have kids hoof it down a mile of dirt road to stand in the dark and scream my name and taunt me with cusses and otherwise raise a ruckus, I would definitely chase them from the scene with my lantern. And that is the story of the Bingham Light.
There's a lot of different pieces there that can all, like, you can draw lines between. This is great.
Yeah, I loved the way that in the end, there's nothing in the historical record that disproves it. And there is suggestive circumstantial evidence.
Yeah, there's definitely threads that you could connect if you wanted to, if you really want to do that.
Yeah.
Wow. This is a good one. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed digging into this.
I really enjoyed not having to do any research on this.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Sometimes it's fun just to like have one that you're like, I don't know anything about this. I'm not going to look at it. Like, just somebody said, do this. I threw it on the list and I know nothing about it.
Yeah.
So that was awesome.
Well, like Park. I said,
I learned something today.
Like I said, it's all on Google Maps. It's all got Street View. You can go there and quote unquote walk around in the area without ever having to actually go there. And it looks really neat.
Yeah. And again, this is new to me, so I'm plugging it. We do not get any endorsements from Microsoft, but if you have Game Pass, you can get Flight Simulator for free. And what I've been doing is flying over places of interest, and you could probably fly along the dirt road and see where the train went and stuff like that.
Almost certainly.
And it's cool because it uses satellite imagery. So it's like, it's real the same way that you could do it in a browser. It's just a little faster than click, click, click. You can sort of like zoom through it. But no, this has been fantastic. Thank you again. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our episodes, please feel free to leave us a rating on the podcast service of your choice or Facebook. That helps us out a lot. We do pay attention to those. Send us an email, arcanecarolinas@gmail.com. I don't think we have any other news right now. We're getting back into a regular cadence of recording. So, looking forward to bringing, I can't remember what's next. I don't think it's a modern weird. It might be a monster story.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Because we did a modern weird on the last one. This one was sort of a spooky one. So we'll probably do a monster next. Monster or aliens, one of the two.
I love them. I love either. Great taste and go great together.
Right. Monster or aliens or monstrous aliens.
Hey.
I'm like sitting on some UFO stuff for Con Carolinas. I don't really want to like burn through too much UFO material. We have that sort of larger talk planned. That's all, folks.
Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, give us a rating, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, send us an email and tell us why. If you're not wrong, we'll try to fix it.
And if you're interested in award-winning speculative fiction, including science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, find me, Michael G. Williams, at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com and check out Falstaff Books at falstaffbooks.com.
If you'd like to pick up some Arcane Carolinas merch, look at behind-the-scenes info, pictures, videos, stuff like that, all the things that get cut, check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can get access to our Patreon, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that in one place, including the merch store. Buy a shirt.
Clothe your body.
Drape your body in our wares.
Be our living billboards.
Well, now it just sounds dirty.
Now it's an even better stinger.